Welcome back to the Rock Church podcast. We're so glad you are joining us again this week. We are here in the studio, and I'm going to introduce ourselves. I am Pastor Michael Erdman.
And I'm Pastor Tyson Lambertson.
We had an amazing talk on Sunday about integration. It's a term that some of you may not be too familiar with, but we really like this language, especially with the Christian walk and emotional intelligence. It's all over Scripture. And Pastor Tyson, would you be able to kind of take us a little bit further into this topic of integration?
Yeah, so 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 is what we looked at as we're going through this series called Continuity. And what you see is that Paul is both holding the good and the bad at the same time. And so I thought, hey, let's dive down into this idea or this philosophy or this thought of integration. And what I'm talking about when we jump into integration is the ability to experience and metabolize the good parts of life as well as the negative aspects of life, losses, imperfections, sin, broken relationship, pain, as well as all the positives. So you have the negative and positive of love, success, accomplishment, and we're able to accept the negatives in our lives as well as hold on to the good.
Yeah.
So accepting the imperfections of life, but also holding on to the good aspects. And at the same time, when we're integrated, we can experience this happiness and success, all the while facing disappointment and loss without losing ourselves, without losing our mission, our focus, our vision. And we see Paul able to do this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. And so through all this integration is that we're able to grieve our losses and use those experiences to move us forward because we've felt loved and valued and were held both good and bad. I like to say it's like a train track. On one side, you got things going really, really good. On the other side, you have the bad stuff, and sometimes the bad stuff's ahead of the not so good, or the good stuff, and the back and forth, and you just have to integrate and navigate those together.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's so important because you made an excellent point on Sunday. It's not if this is going to happen, it's when. And I think that is important to remember. I know in my own life that when the bad gets ahead of the good, as you said on the tracks, it's so easy to focus on that and start to get into failure mode or shame and guilt, and I'm not good enough. And you can't, you paralyze yourself when you're not able to look at that and say, no, I'm not knocking that out of the park, but I'm able to see it for what it is and move into it instead of away from it.
Yeah. I think the juxtaposition of the good news, like the gospel's good news, and we love to hold on to great scripture verses like, I'm more than a conqueror. God has good plans for me to prosper, not to harm me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Blessed are you when you come in, and blessed are you when you go out. And we love to hold on to those, and we should. But there's parts of life that we don't feel that.
Right.
There's parts of life. And so Paul was trying to teach these Thessalonians on how to integrate their life, that while they have some good things going on, Paul can't be there because he's being followed by the mob that want to kill him and take him out. And so he sends Timothy, and he hears great things that are happening there, but yet he himself is feeling left alone, like lonely. And so just navigating all that and just hearing Paul's voice through that was pretty powerful for me.
Yeah. It's one of those good reminders in the gospel of that reality that, hey, it's not all going to be easy and cushy, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be something that you have to work through. And I think it's important to focus not only on that, but to bring it up because, like you said, those context verses that we do take and make a use out of it that isn't right. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I remember seeing that verse in sports so many times. And it doesn't really work in that context. per se.
Sure. I think one of the struggles that we miss is that we think all things good come from the Lord, and they do. He's a good father, right? But we forget that there's an enemy out there that wants to take us out, that Satan himself wants to dismantle us and hinder us, is what Paul said.
Yeah.
That he's wanting to put a stop to the good news being shared for the power of salvation and for the oppressed to be set free and the poor to be lifted up. And so Satan wants to keep people suppressed, oppressed, possessed. And we forget about that aspect that while there is God, there's also this devil who wants to take you out.
Yeah.
And so navigating some of those, and then the other part of this is there's sin. And our sin causes negative effects on our life.
Those consequences.
There's consequences, yeah. So we have this idea that everything's going to be hunky-dory when I come to Christ. And I'm sorry if your Sunday school teacher on the flannel board said, when you come to Christ, everything's going to be good, because that's not reality. You're still going to face persecution. You're still going to face struggle. You're still going to face life. And it's what you do with that. Can you hold it all the while knowing that Jesus himself is victorious at the end, that he's for you, he's not against you, that he's with you. But you got all these bad things happening. So how do you keep all of this? And there's a word that's thrown around in leadership circles called resiliency. So how do you stay resilient in this? And part of it is integration, being able to hold both the good and the bad.
Yeah. And this is something that we need to talk about as a church body, is this emotional intelligence, this awareness of what is our feelings in these moments, because a lot of times we run away from it. A lot of times we don't want to experience the bad. We want to make it stop. And that's where I think we get in trouble. We get in a lot of trouble just saying, well, just make it stop. I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get back that good feeling again. Because, well, I've been told, or I think, or I believe that following Jesus it's only good. It's only good. And while it is, absolutely, it's your best life.
Right.
There is a war, and there is, like you said, a devil that wants to kill you.
Literally wants to kill you. The struggle is that when that happens, Paul tells us in the scripture to rejoice. James tells us to consider it all joy, my brother, when you face various trials, various persecution. That's hard for our finite minds to wrap our head around, that, yes, while the good things are happening, there are bad things, but I'm supposed to consider it joyful and rejoice in the midst of heartache and chaos and loss and confusion. How do I do that? And this integration piece has got to be key in our life, that we can, we tend to focus more on the negative than actually what is good. What good is happening in our life.
Right. To see God in the struggle, to see him beside us in that moment of pain and the refining. I mean, we see in scripture when the disciples are brought before the Sanhedrin and they're beaten and told to not speak the name of Jesus again, and they leave rejoicing, considering it an honor, to a privilege to be persecuted for the name of Christ. And man, you look at that and you go, how did they do that?
Yeah.
And so can you maybe explain a little bit of the process of how to get a start into this integration? Because I think, we talk about it, we say it's a great thing, but yet it's still something that has to be intentionally learned, something that I think we have to intentionally seek out. And I know at the Rock Church, we do this teaching and we strive for emotional intelligence, but maybe there's some out there that don't quite understand how to start even beginning to explore a awareness of this themselves.
So I not only think it's emotional intelligence, I think it's spiritual intelligence.
Yes.
When you read the Bible, you've got to really know that there are three things taking in place: that God is for you, that there's Satan who wants to take you down, and then there's your own sin. And so we got to find a place to recognize that God himself is perfecting us. He is establishing us. He is setting us into a place, is what Paul says, that he's called you to this eternal glory that is beyond this life. That God is the God of all grace. He's the God of all kindness. He's the God of all hope. And you're going to experience suffering.
Yeah.
So you got all this good, but you do have suffering. You do have trials. You do have tribulation. You will have to hold both at the same time. They're going to collide. They're going to be happening, and suffering and trials may feel like they're way ahead of the good stuff. And then 2 days later, it switches and it's back and forth. And how do you hold on to this? And how do you navigate this? Well, you got God who wants to help you. He wants to be in a relationship with you. He wants you to pray. He wants you to seek him. But the Bible also says that it's not good for man to be alone, and we need each other.
Yes.
So recognizing that you're not the only one going through this is very, very difficult when you're going through it. But other people are experiencing the same thing. Maybe a little different, maybe different struggles, and we all struggle. We all have this thing that's happening, good and bad all the time.
Yeah. The refining fire, you use that refining. There's the story that I always like to think about when that happens. And no process of refining is a simple, quick deal. It's, you use the silversmith method, the terminology. It's used in the Old Testament as well. And the silversmith would burn the silver for hours and hours and sit there and watch it, and it would burn out all impurities. And somebody asked, well, how do you know if the silver's done? And the silversmith says, I can see my reflection in it. And I always think about the Father being the one who's refining us, and he's waiting until the impurities are burned out, the imperfections, the things that hurt us, until we reflect the very nature of God. That's the refinement.
Yeah. That is the refinement.
But nobody likes the refining.
No. And I think some of the areas that probably pop up are indications of problem in our integration piece. Knowing that Paul struggled with this as well, but yet he was willing to have the encouraging report, but also hold on to the negative, that he was no longer able to go to the Thessalonians. He was no longer able to be with them, and he was broken, and he knew what was coming. And but I think some indications are when we live in shame and when we live in guilt, and we're in a deficit of integration, and when we begin to blame other people for our problems, and we're defensive, and we have this cognitive process that's either, straight up black and white, there's some integration pieces, because we know that this world is not always going to be good, and it's not always going to be bad. And when we come into this perfectionism, there's some integration problems with us because we're not willing to hold the bad.
Yeah. The iron sharpens iron. You said we need each other. And I've seen that so much in my own life and in others that I've been able to walk through life with. Men's groups are a great example. We find in these groups that we're able to connect with each other. And I know as I was coming back into my walk with Christ, that as I was speaking out these struggles that I was having, thinking I'm the only one that's ever had them, or thinking that I'm alone, or thinking that I'll be, ostracized or whatever it is that I had in my mind. As I'm speaking these out, it almost felt like it lost the power of the shame over me. And it was not minimized. It was not, gone, but it was able to be faced at that time finally and dealt with. And it was the men around me that lifted me up and encouraged me and brought me to a place where they said, you can walk through this and we'll walk through this with you. And I think that encouragement of each other, we need each other, is so important in this integration piece.
Yeah, vulnerability is the key to integration. you have to, it's hard to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
We don't know how to in America. We don't know how to be vulnerable because there's this protective identity or philosophy in our culture that says you can't show all your cards. When in fact, the thing that we need to do is show all the cards so that we can be healed.
Yes.
And I'm 100% positive that Paul, with all of his churches, told them that he was a former sinner who persecuted Christians, but he had a change on the Damascus Road, and now he's writing to all these churches that he started. And the only way for him to hold both good and bad was that he was vulnerable with how he lived, how he thought, what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
But when Christ changed him, he was born again. He was a new creation. And he still struggled.
Absolutely.
And you see it through his writings. So I think we lack vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that's a key piece of holding both good and the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The vulnerability opening up. It's hard to let that wall down, almost as if we think that if somebody sees behind it, they'll use it against us.
Right.
Whereas when you're in the right place and with the safe people that you need to be to do this well, that is exactly what gives you back the power that lets you take that back up to say, no, I can do this. God is for me. And this is where that verse comes in and is perfect. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can face these things because he's with me and I have people that are for me as well.
Right. And I think when you're with safe people and you are vulnerable with the things that are happening in your life, you realize that they're going through the same things. But Satan is a great author of isolation and loneliness. And I think that's what hell's going to be. It's not going to be a big old party and everybody's going to be dancing and fire and all those things. No, I think it's eternal isolation where you can hear weeping and gnashing of teeth and you can smell things, but you're alone. You're isolated. I like to say this, you're in cubicle land for eternity. And so when you're able to share and break through that isolation and loneliness, you can move from this idea that I'm alone to a sense of I'm loved. I'm held. And when you get with safe people, you can hold the positive realities of life as well as the negative realities of life. And you can dive down in and see God do a marvelous work in you and through others for you.
And I think this is where you start to lose this spirit of judgment of others. You start to lose the cynicalism, if that's the correct term, cynicism. of what others are doing. You start to see people for more of who they are because it's a relatability. It's I've been there, or wow, I can feel that you've been there and you're for me. And there's a unity that happens in this vulnerability that is so necessary to continue to encourage each other and walk this path with Jesus.
Yeah. Paul was a great integrator. I mean, because he had some negative realities going on, and yet he still loved the people of Thessalonica.
Yeah.
And I think one of the areas of deficit in integration is that when your performance or your achievements are more important than relationships, and so you do everything you can to one up, you do everything you can to be at all things when you're just human, you're not Jesus, and you become highly critical of other people, it's a bad integration problem. So when you see Paul he's running for his life and he's in Athens where he could write a letter. If he had horrible integration, he would have went himself back to Thessalonica, but he's like, I can't. So I'm going to send you my understudy, and we can get into the idea that Paul was, you know what? I can't be there, but I'm going to send you Timothy, and I trust him. I believe in him. He empowered other leaders to go. That's healthy integration, to empower people to be part of your team, to be part of your life, but also empower them to go do and be.
Yeah. It's raising people up. Well, I know that integration is still something that I'm working on in my own life,
Me too.
and it's been an amazing journey, both good and bad.
100%.
Well, that does it for us for today. I think this is a good stopping point. Pastor Tyson, thank you so much for helping us understand a little bit more of how to do this and what it looks like in our walk with Jesus and our own personal everyday day walk as well. And I hope as you as listeners tuning in today, this has helped you maybe want to explore a little bit more. Please feel free to reach out to any of us here at The Rock, and we'd be happy to talk to you as well about this topic of integration and maybe give us some of your questions that go along with the sermon series we're in, Continuity. We hope you enjoyed today. We'll want to send you out with this blessing. May the Lord bless you. May he keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. And I pray that we see you again on Sunday. God bless.